So Bradley Wiggins, good to see you.
Thank you for having me, Fearne.
Are you well today?
I am actually, yeah. I'm a bit rushed this morning trying to find here, but we got here eventually.
You had a wild goose chase to find my house, but I'm glad that you've made it here. We've got lots to talk about. I'd love to talk first of all about the Mind Ride London to Essex campaign that you're involved in.
Yes.
It's happening in May. Why do you want to be involved in it? How can people get involved to help with what Mind are doing?
It's in May. Mind have got a few places extra to do to fill up, and I think cycling is it's a real passageway to kind of freedom and mental freedom. Really, it's there's a famous quote, saying actually within cycling that outside is free, and everyone has access to a bicycle, and I think it's it has the ability to change people's lives. People getting on a bike, obviously there's the obsession side of it, and people get carried away and start spending lots of money, but just getting a few people on these bikes and filling up these places, it's I think it's the first time this ride's been back on for a few years because it's been canned. It's a great opportunity to find some people and get them involved in it and hopefully change their lives. So it's something that I'm really got behind because cycling, I'd be nothing without cycling in my life. It's given me everything, but at the same time, it nearly took everything away from me. So.
Yes, because you've had from the articles that I've read that you've done recently, although it's been an incredibly successful journey and part of your life, it's definitely been a complicated one.
It has, but I'm adamant that had it not happened, I wouldn't have had the success I had. I believe that all my success stems from adversity and pain and running away from problems in my life. And I think that was the difference between being good at something and great at something. I think greatness stems from adversity. I had to deal with all that stuff when I stopped cycling when I was 36, really. So it was a long period. It's why I had sustained success as well, because it was always on to the next thing. It was moving on to the next thing. And it was, I'm a freer man now. I've dealt with it all in my head.
So having that sense that you were running from pain and the past, did you, when you were sort of having that ascent in your cycling career, did you assume that when you reached the pinnacle of success that you would feel free from the past?
No, because I didn't know I was running from it at the time.
Oh, right.
The main thing that drove me throughout my cycling career was fear, and that emotion was fear, really. And so when I look back, the fear, I never knew where it stemmed from, really. I was always a scared person, really, most of the time when I was going into events, going into Olympic finals and things, and it was always the fear of losing. And that fear of losing was something that stemmed from my childhood, really. I don't know why. I haven't really dealt with that yet, but it's certainly when I looked back at my career, there was no joy. There was no enjoyment. There was no enjoying the moment, the success. It was like ticking a box. And winning became the normal, winning became the standard, and it was always the case of moving on to the next thing. And when I didn't have something to move on to, I'd slip away and start drinking and things like that. So I get bored very easy. So I needed something to occupy my mind, really, and focusing on an objective which was far enough away down the distance that I could go through a process and occupy myself in the process and keep myself busy. Routine for me and distraction and having a goal on something was a great distraction from dealing with looking at myself.
So would you say that reaching that pinnacle of success, which I'm sure you would equate to being, winning the time trials at the Olympics in 2012, Tour de France triumph, were they the moments where you had to start examining that and go, oh, well, I've done the things I wanted to do, now what?
Yeah, I think the Olympics was a big one in London because that had been so far down the road. Obviously, they announced the Olympics in London 2007. So that had always been like a long-term objective, 5 years, really. But when I achieved it, I won the Tour de France and I won the Olympics 10 days later. And I think I said to Matt Dawson at the finish of 5 Live, give me an interview, and I said, I don't think it's ever going to get any better than this, and I don't know what I'm going to do now, really. And that was the reality of it, really. Is I was almost annoyed that it was over because I had nothing else. I had no daily routine after that, what to do. I didn't know what I was getting out of bed for in the morning. So I slipped for the next 5, 6 months after that, really, into kind of playing this character, and I was famous, and I didn't know how to handle it. So I played this kind of veil of a rock star kind of thing, and that was just from my insecurity, really, and adopted something that I perceived to be quite cool. But yeah, I never really got back to the heights after that. I won things after that and won world titles and things like that, but in terms of like a mental, kind of achievement. That was as good as it ever got. But then I decided that the Olympics in Rio was going to be my last Olympic Games, and I got to that, and I knew I was pretty much going to retire then. I was done pretty much. I craved normality, but I didn't know what normal life was for me, really. So I struggled ever since then. I went into rowing after that. I took up rowing with a view to maybe try and make an Olympic team in rowing, but I was chasing my tail on that one, because you don't pick up rowing just overnight. It took many, many years. So it's I struggled after that, really, yeah. And then I think from that point on, then I started addressing myself really, and dealing with stuff that had happened in my childhood that I hadn't accepted.
So that's really been a time of healing from that moment where everyone would assume you're on top of the world. It's the best day of your life. That was almost the start of something unraveling.
Yeah. I mean, my career, I'm proud of it and it means a lot to me, but it doesn't define me. And I think it's not something now that I sit back and look on and sort of think, God, they were the best years of my life. They were just, I think whatever I do now is almost going to, like this stuff that I'm doing now has been much more rewarding, really, much more fulfilling as a person. But it's a funny thing, I just think lots of people don't accept and deal with things that they did until they get older. I didn't, because I had to adopt a persona which was one of a sportsman, really, which you could not be perceived to have any weaknesses or any dinks in your armour, and so you've got to be too cool for school the whole time, really, and you can't let your guard down 1 minute. And it's obviously once you stop and that's gone, I just had to start. I think that a lot of it to do with my son is a cyclist now, really, and he got to the age of 13 and it was like looking in the mirror. He started having coaches and things around him, and then I realised what norm is, what normality should be, really. And I think that's when I started addressing sort of certain things that had happened to me, really, and then the abnormality of my childhood, really, and how it shouldn't have been like that. But at the same time, we're all products of our childhood and products of our environment, and I wouldn't have achieved what I achieved, and I wouldn't be the person I'm sat here today had I not had that. So, and I'm not alone, and I think that's one of the things as well. Once you start talking about this stuff, you realise you're not alone.
Yeah.
And I think that's been the most liberating thing.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Something that was your greatest embarrassment and shame, which is one of the reasons why you don't talk about a lot of these things, is something that actually makes you is the most empowering thing for you when you do come and talk about it and start speaking to people, and then see the opportunity available to you after that in terms of what you want to do work. Because one of the other things as well, once I stopped cycling, I didn't really know what I wanted to do in my life. So I went on the jump to begin with, hated it. And then I went down the whole avenues of like corporate speaking, keynote speaking and things like that. But nothing was really hitting the spot and rewarding me and fulfilling me. And funnily enough, it's the stuff I've been doing recently, launched a campaign for the NSPCC and stuff, the stuff that isn't paid work that has been the most rewarding and most fulfilling.
Yeah, being a service.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like you say, like connecting, and I wonder how much of that has helped you move through very tricky situations, because your work with the NSPCC is motivated personally because you suffered abuse when you were a teenager from one of your coaches.
Yes.
That is obviously something that is going to take years of healing and processing. Where are you with that? How do you feel today about having to face that period of your life?
Yeah, I mean, I think the hardest point was going through the campaign stuff and in Recall, doing interviews about it, and drawing on your experience to help the campaign. And I actually struggled quite a lot that period, and I didn't realise it more than anything. It's just, I was having to relive some of the minor incidents that happened to me with this coach to newspapers like the Express, and that just to draw, in order to help the campaign, in order to draw experience and kind of add weight to the campaign, I draw one or two of the sort of lesser minor incidents, if you could call them that happened to me. Because one of the things that I realised with this happened over a 3-year period. I can't remember how many times it happened. And we're talking sort of incidents from very minor to like borderline, which you could deem as rape, sexual abuse, whatever term you want to use. But it just in recalling this sort of stuff and going on your own experiences to add weight to the campaign and doing interviews and trying to really beef it up, I found that I was, it took me back, and I was recalling lots of the incidents that happened in my head over and over again, particularly this guy's face. And it really hit me hard the week after that, really. So I have to be careful how much I do in order to help other people, and at the expense of myself, really, because I probably took it for granted a little bit that I was through this and I was fine. I guess, as you say, there's lots of different there's a timeline with it, and there's a process to go through, and I was probably earlier in that process than I thought I was, really. And
Is that because you've been so used to blocking it out?
I think maybe, yeah. And I've never seen a therapist. Probably something I should do, really. Yeah. I've had to deal with it all myself.
Really?
Yeah, I've lost trust in therapists, mainly because of the one we had at British Cycling, but we'll come to that. So last April was the first time I came out about it with Alistair in Men's Health.
Yep.
So I thought, a year on, I'm right now, I can talk about it. Yeah, I can help anyone, do you want me to tell you what happened to me? And he started doing stuff like that. I was like, I found that actually, Brad, this is pretty heavy now. And I had to back off a little bit after that because, then NSPC were like, we'd love you to get involved in more campaigns and stuff like that. But I go, I have to be careful here. I need to make sure that I'm all right. And I think I underestimated, and that was the first red flag for me, really. So a couple of weeks off, not thinking about it, but not thinking about it is not actually dealing with it, is it really? So it was a learning experience in that process for me, really. And I'm still early in that process. And as you just said, this is something that's going to take a long time to, and I hadn't appreciated that. I thought the minute you sort of saying, yeah, I'm over it now. Yeah. But it was a wake-up call.
Yeah, I think one of the hardest things, I guess, with any type of trauma is that it could be a life's work in dealing with it. And sometimes there are situations where you might never make complete peace, but it's still worth walking down the road.
I never considered it a trauma.
Really?
No. And what is a trauma, really? I had a knife put to my throat as a kid and things like that. And I always think of that as like terrifying moments. So I always sort of considered that to be a trauma. But I don't know what a trauma's supposed to feel like. Is a trauma, it comes something that you can't think about or whatever. I don't know. And I think that's been part of the learning process with this is I'm learning new definitions to what we throw words around like trauma time and stuff. Yeah. Because I've started to understand that, it's not something that you recall in memory, because I'd recall things in memory and not be fine about them. I could talk about them and be candidly open. But I think sometimes it's in doing that, it's the abnormality of something that I struggle to get my head around sometimes as well. And the phrase I've used a few times, certainly in Mind magazine, was the greatest shame was that another man had done this act to me. And that was my greatest shame, is that I couldn't get my head around the sort of abnormality of that. That's not supposed to be right, particularly 13. And that is a trauma, isn't it? Because it
is. And also the reaction can be one that is deemed success, which yours was. Your reaction was to push yourself to the point of global
I think
success.
From that moment it happened, I pretended it didn't happen.
Yeah.
And that was the easiest way to deal with it. And then from that moment I just dedicated my life to cycling as a distraction. But this guy as well, this guy as well, that actually he met me when I was 12 and he felt my pulse. And he said, the strength of your pulse, he says, you're going to change cycling, you'll be the greatest cyclist that's ever lived.
Yes.
It was amazing, yeah. He used to say that to everyone he met. And I couldn't understand why was I the one that, yeah.
But this happened to other people as well, you found out since.
Well, yeah, so since then, when I announced it with Alistair Campbell, I had 3 messages from 3 different club mates who were in the same club at the time, said, looking back, we kind of all knew, really, and we should have all done more to help you. So,
but that's what the campaign that you've been running has been about, is spotting signs, is not feeling scared to intervene.
A lot of it's just common sense.
Yeah.
There's not sort of remembering 10 things, if this.
Yeah.
Sometimes the effects of abuse aren't clear and recognisable. But, we all have a duty. We can always sense when there's something not right with a child. And even just that aloofness, quietness, it's just, even if you don't sense it, it's just something, just befriending a child to ask them if we could talk to you about anything, if there's anything you want to talk about, feeling that comfort, feeling that protection. I think that's the biggest one, is feeling someone that you feel protected by. Yeah. And a lot of kids lack protection in childhood. And it's just common sense. A lot of it's common sense as a human being. It's not about, I didn't recognise the signs. It's just ask kid if he's all right. And that fear of intervening, yes, fear of being wrong, that fear of accusing someone or something, or the insinuation of something to someone that is, upsetting for people. But it's It's a funny one, isn't it? But again, this campaign I got involved in, it's the starting point. I can't believe nothing's been done like that before.
Yeah.
It just shows you how behind we are. And even when I did that, one of the things I recognise with that, asking questions and answering questions, a lot of these people, is how political it starts getting after a while. It starts getting about money and funding and are they doing enough and statistics and all this. And then sometimes the questions have to be, steered towards the CEO and the chairman of the ASBCD, because I couldn't answer after questions on political stuff. I realised that it's a lot of politics and money and financial stuff. Lots of it starts getting in the way of actual action being taken and done.
Yeah.
And I imagine it's tough work and a barrier for these people. And
but it's very important to have the storytelling side of it, as painful as that has been and will be for you. I think it's deeply powerful, because there'll be people listening to this now who may have experienced very similar to you, and it could be completely, kept in an insular way to them, which is doing them no good at all.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned a moment ago a feeling which is obviously prevalent in this area, which is shame. And I've definitely had periods of my life where I've been sort of drowning in shame, and it's a horrible, ugly emotion, and one that's very hard to negate when you've got a past like this. So how do you deal with those feelings? How are you moving through it and getting on with your life?
I think as part of that process, by talking about it, and obviously it has an effect on me when I talk about it at that time, but I have to learn to come away from that and recover. It's a bit like doing a race. I empty myself and then recover, and that's part of the process as well. But that's it. Even though it has an after effect in talking about it to that extent, I just have to give myself time and space afterwards to recover and heal. But it's a bit like training as a cyclist. You train your body, you damage the muscle, you repair it, and it grows stronger. So I think this is part of the process for me as well. Is it's never a case of just leaving it and never talking about it again. But in talking about it and sharing it, that's the fulfilling part, is in sharing that story with other people and maybe touching one or two people. Some of the message I got after various campaigns and things I've done have been really, really rewarding and touching for me and fulfilling. But it's not something I can focus on constantly. It's like a constant, it needs time to rest and the right environment as well, and then come back to it. So that has been the most rewarding thing, is seeing the effects or touching one or two people and their experiences. But it definitely needs time afterwards, where you have to just shut it down as some mental recovery, because this isn't something you could just go to therapy twice a week for and constantly keep touching the traumas. Because I think, like the people that have gone to therapy that told me that you start tapping into a trauma, it leaves you drained for days afterwards. Yeah. And that's what I've got to be careful of, really. So it has been a learning experience for me, really. Do
you think therapy's on the cards? Is it something you'll consider?
I have to, yeah. I suppose I have to at some point, yeah.
I mean, there's so many...
Where'd you start?
I mean, there's so many interesting different therapeutic things these days. EMDR therapy, cognitive somatic work. I mean, it's definitely worth a go.
No, I think I'm going to definitely. There's a lot of fear associated with that as well, I think.
From you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm almost scared to find out what I'm going to find out.
Yeah.
And that's probably not what I've been ready for up to this point, but I'm kind of ready for it now. Like I said, fear's always been a driving force in my life. And I think that fear is attached to the unknown, really, because obviously there's a lot with my father as well, which is attached to that subject, because I wish he'd been around more. It's very complex.
So that was another driving force for your determination during your career, was your dad was very absent from when you were a tiny kid.
Yeah.
And you also, not only was he absent, but you idolised him. You had this maybe slightly warped vision of who he was to you.
Well, he was a professional cyclist, and I grew up knowing all about him. My mum always told me about him, but she glorified him in a cycling sense. I got so seen pictures of him and everything, what he was good at, this, that, and the other. He was a hard Australian who liked fighting, and so I idolised him. And but she also glorified all his bad traits. He was violent, he was aggressive towards her, me, and there were very many other people. But he was an alcoholic. Probably bipolar when I look back. We called him manic depressive, but he certainly struggled from bipolar, probably because lots of people told me since he was never liked me on his own and things like that. So I kind of, it's in this sort of bizarre situation I found myself in my teens with my coach. I had a stepfather who was physically violent towards me a lot, most kids' dads were in the 80s. You know, it was like a different time. This before the New Age man, and I always wished my dad was around really to protect me. You know, I always wished I had a father figure around to protect me, and so that was part of the drive in cycling as well. Is trying to show him, prove to him, and follow his footsteps. So I took up cycling. My mum pushed me into cycling. She never stopped loving my father, and you know, she said your dad never wanted you to be a cyclist, but I think you'll be really good at it. So I kind of took up cycling. Then that started happening was pretty much as soon as I started cycling with my coach. And I just wished I'd had a dad around. So the part of the drive and the fear was just that was the closest connection I could have with my father, was just following his footsteps, really.
I mean, you sort of reconnected with him in your late teens. So how was that?
Yes, so when I was going through my teens and cycling, everywhere I went, everyone knew who my dad was. Because my dad was feared and revered. It was like, when I was in the cycling world, it was like having a dad, because they'd all say, "Oh, you're Wiggins' boy, aren't you?" God, yeah. And so it was like having Ronnie Cray as your dad, you know, that kind of thing. It was a little bit, you know, like people would be a bit scared, but a bit. And I say Ronnie Cray because they were terrified of him as well, because he was a liability and a loose cannon. But it was like having a dad in the cycling world for the first time. You know, and it's, is he going to be like his dad was? You know, like it was like I had this sort of strength of my dad without him being around. As I got better and better, and I sort of it was this weird dynamic of it was the closest I could be to my dad is in the cycling world, because his name was always, people come up to me, "Oh, you're Gary, aren't you?" No, "Oh, sorry, you're Bradley, aren't you?" Because you know, and I got nicknamed Wiggo from a young Wiggo's boy and all this. So I had a dad without him being present. Anyway, I got to 17 and I started winning junior titles and world titles. And then my nan got a phone call when I was 18, because she still had the same phone number, 3285492. She's always had it since it was 01328.
I love how the brain stores unuseful shit.
Because I always used to reverse the charges to my nans.
A classic 90s move.
My dad had her number still. He rang up and he said, "Hello, little Maureen, it's Gary, it's can I speak to Brad?" And so we didn't have a landline, so my nan ran through the flats, and my mum said, "Oh, your dad's rang. Do you want to speak to him?" So anyway, that's how I hadn't seen him for 16 years.
And you hadn't spoken to him in 16 years. Wow.
And I rang him up, and he said, "Yeah, hello, Bradley, it's your father." And he'd seen my name in a cycling magazine in Australia, and he seen a B. Wiggins, and he thought, that must be Brad. And he wanted to be back part of my life again, because I was starting to be successful. And yeah, we were chatted, you know, bits and pieces on the phone and stuff over the next year. I won the Junior World Championship, and then it started turning a little bit. You know, he goes, "This is because you're my son, you're doing this well." And this was just all phone conversation. And in the end, I went to meet him. I met my dad when I was 19 in Belgium for the first time. That was really tough when I look back. Only because I got my own son now, you know. Yeah. It must be really hard. Well, it was hard meeting your dad when you're 19.
Yeah.
And him being your hero, but as you just wanted your dad your whole life.
Yeah.
But by then I was really good, and he started turning on me and very competitive, and he says, "You know, you'll never be as good as your old man." That's what his words were. Wow. And they always stuck with me from that point on.
Well, cool.
And I found myself never not liking him, couldn't wait to get rid of him, couldn't wait till he went back to Australia. And then for the next 12, 13 years, that was there's a fear, and you'll never be as good as your old man. And that was the thing that drove me for the rest of my life then. You know, he won a European title, you know, and he was Australian champion, but, you know, I won 11 world titles, 5 Olympic golds, Tour de France, our record. I never stopped after that. It was all because I wanted to be better than my dad. Wow. And then he got murdered in 2008, and I had to deal with that. And then it was like, yeah.
And that's still unresolved.
I never went to the funeral. No, they never found out.
No. So how does that sit with you?
If he was here today, I wish there's so many questions I could ask him. As a man now, you know,